Neither reviewers nor humans. Let's talk about The Returned.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back. The Eye of the Storm podcast. Daniel, would you like to let the people know what we're doing today?
So this is Have You Seen, in which we talk about a movie that some of us know well and others have just seen for the first time. This week we are talking about The Returned, which is a 2013 Spanish-Canadian zombie movie, which is about a world in which a zombie epidemic had happened a generation earlier. And the world has recovered from that, but a proportion of the population is infected by the zombie virus, and there is a treatment. And now the treatment is about to run out. And the story follows an infected man and his wife, who is a nurse whose job it is to administer this drug to the returned, which is the name in this world for the people who carry the zombie virus. And so they basically have tough choices to make as they realize that the treatment is about to experience a shortage. So I encountered this movie by chance maybe 7-8 years ago, and I've watched it a couple of times since then. And it's one of those movies where I just randomly found it somewhere, had no idea what it was, it didn't know anything about it, and it just kind of blew me away because it was just such a good time. And that is why I suggested it for this, because you had not seen this movie before, right? So what's your impression having seen The Returned for the first time?
It definitely has a very strong premise, and it does a lot of really good world building in terms of making you feel and understand what a post-zombie apocalyptic world could potentially feel like, where you had the different factions, or not the different factions, but you had the kind of the returned group who were protesting, and whether you say rightly or wrongly, depending on how you view the infected, because they were a couple of missed doses away from, or pretty much one missed dose away from turning into a zombie and being a major threat to those around them. That whole element of the the return group was great. I thought it presented a lot of human dilemmas, and a lot of complexities to how you would deal with people that are returned into society, and two, how it would feel to be someone that is returned. So I feel like it had a lot of good ideas, and it had a lot of good elements to it. On the actual narrative plot side of things, it was okay. It was one that was sort of easy to follow. I don't think I completely fell in love with the characters in this, which is why I'm a bit just cool on it. I think it has a lot of really good elements to it, but I wasn't completely sold on the movie. And that's not to say it's a bad movie. I still think it's a good movie, but I just kind of wasn't super invested in the character. If you kind of get what I'm saying, because I like a lot of the core concepts and a lot of the ideas behind this movie and this post-zombie apocalyptic world, but I just didn't find myself immersed in the characters to really be along for the journey, if you kind of get what I'm saying. It just kind of felt like things were happening pretty much. And I know the whole idea was they were, at one point, comfortable. They had enough jet injections, and as the movie progressed, those comforts were being taken away from them, and, the time that he had was getting shorter and shorter, and they were getting desperate and desperate. I did like that element of the story, but I don't know, there was just something about it that, and it's hard to put my finger on it, that just didn't connect with me on the character level, whilst still enjoying everything else that was happening around the movie and the sort of the concepts and ideas, if that makes sense.
So were they just unlikable, uninteresting? Did they not have an interesting story? Or what? Or what's the issue?
I feel like they were probably uninteresting, is what I would say.
So they are very, I was going to say basic, but that's kind of meaner than I mean it. But they're kind of like very stereotypical upper middle class urban people. She's a nurse. His job seems to be to just teach guitar lessons. I don't remember if he has another income, but they are doing quite well. They live in a nice apartment. They're saving for a house, and they are kind of just normal people, right? And the only thing that's remarkable is that Alex, the husband, is infected by the rage virus, is affected by the zombie virus, because he had a random encounter with a zombie at one point years ago, years after the zombie apocalypse. And he basically has just been afflicted by this virus, like through no fault of his own. And then we've got Kate. She works in a returned unit, which treats people who are diagnosed with carrying the zombie virus, and she administers the treatment, right, which is a daily injection that you have to take otherwise, and if you miss only one, you turn into a zombie. And society is pretty paranoid about somebody doing that, right? And there's a lot of debate in this movie about what people should do with the returned, right? Because if they mess up once, or if they get into an accident once and so they miss the dose or whatever, or if somebody comes into contact with their blood, the damage is done, right? And there's no coming back from turning into a zombie in this world, right? So is it just that they were just not kind of bland people, or is their story like was it the acting? Was it
Partly the acting in this, and you can tell this probably had a much smaller budget than some of the bigger blockbusters. But I don't think it's just that. I feel like I didn't feel the weight of the emotional story that they were trying to tell between the two of them. And yes, I understand that they were trying to build a future together. They were trying to start a family and live in that house that they always dreamed of. But I just never felt the emotional weight of it. So that every time that there were stakes, or there were meant to be stakes in the movie, I just didn't feel it, or I didn't feel the emotion behind it, even to the point where we get to the end of the movie. And that scene did have its moments, and it had its touching moments, but I didn't feel the full weight of it. I kind of viewed it as, that last scene where he's in the studio, he's marked out an area which is safe for his partner to stand behind, and he's like chained himself to the wall. I do kind of recognize the moments in that, but I just wasn't ever connected to their journey together to really feel the weight of the emotion. Where I felt it the most was the portrayal of his friend, when it turned out that his wife was a person that was returned as well. Out of desperation, he robbed his friend that he knew of 25 years, basically condemning him to death, all to save the person that he loves the most. And the complexities behind that, and trying to understand human behavior behind that, and the lengths that people will go to for the ones that they love. And, who do you hold most important to you? How do you value the people around you? Who kind of takes priority? And in this situation, it was his wife, and he would do anything to save her. And even though he kind of ate him up and it tore him up, he just had to do it. And actually, what I actually enjoyed a lot about that dynamic was the fact that Alex and the nurse didn't know that she was a returned as well. Because you have that whole scene at the dinner where he, after so many years, says what he is. And again, you can imagine in that particular world where people that are the returned are almost persecuted, are seen as a danger, seen as a threat, and are being beaten up. And in this movie, they take a lot further as well, kind of breaking into hospitals to actually kill the people that are being cured. For him to carry that for so many years and finally feel comfortable enough to open up to his friend, who we'd known for 25 years, but the friend didn't then offer in turn. And it probably isn't the friend's place, because it's his wife, and they have to consult and talk about whether she would want other people to know as well, just again because of the circumstances and because of how a person who's returned has to live in society. But the fact that Alex opened up and he didn't know that his wife was returned speaks volumes to how the movie handled the human elements of this really well, and handled the complexities of how do you deal with the situation? How do you deal with the drama? How do you deal with the conflicts? How do you deal with the stigma that comes with it? I feel like on that level, the movie handled all of those really, really well.
and it's desperation and scarcity too, right? Like there is no like we know, having seen the movie and knowing how it ends, we know that they could have shared, right? And then they would have had more than enough, because they had something like 100 doses, and if each of them had taken 50, that would have still been much more than more than possible. But like, imagine if you're like diabetic and you have like 100 doses of insulin, would you give away half, not knowing if there would ever be more, right? Like it's like a very real. I thought, like, I was on board with the characters, right? They're not they're not the most interesting, but they are real. I felt like, and they, to me, at least to me, they sold this idea of these are just normal people who just stumble into this situation. And so I was on board with them, and I was actually surprised that you liked the betrayal by the friend if you didn't like the characters in the first place. Because to me, because I like these two people and because their friends are nice enough, when their friends then betray them, like in this very serious way, right, condemning Alex to death because they take his dosages, I figured you'd have to care about these people first before that has an impact.
You would think so. I felt it more because I was trying to. So I was always suspicious of the two of them while I was watching the movie, and my thinking was that they were actually going to sell Alex out to the anti the returned group. I can't remember what they're called in this movie. There were a few things in there. There was even a scene where Kate said to Jacob how he was sounding like the anti the returned group at one point in this movie. So my thinking was the whole time that they were going to sell Alex out, and they were maybe weren't part of the anti the return group, but had some similar thinking and some similar ideologies behind it. And again, no, it would have made sense, but where I was like thinking it was, you didn't know this person had it the whole time, and maybe you had these like, you know, you could say bigoted opinions of it, but didn't completely share it. But now you know someone's completely close to you is, and then how that would kind of mess with your psyche and mess with, you know, how you view that person. So when it turned out that actually his wife was also a return, it just kind of like took me by surprise. And then I wouldn't say I felt it for Alex, but I just felt it for the story. And I know what I'm saying doesn't make sense, because again, you have to be emotionally invested in the characters to really, you know, to always feel emotion in stories. But I don't know, for whatever reason, I felt it for the story. I felt the twist was a bit sad for him. And, you know, again, his desperation, his begging, his, you know, trying to plead with him. Even, it went even for the whole thing. It was like, just give me a few more days. And then Alex would then be able to try and figure out and sort out something else for himself. I felt it on that level.
Yeah, I think the movie really sets the idea of desperation, right? That these are people who are normally not experiencing scarcity in any way, right? They have never really been desperate, they've never been hungry, but they are in this situation where they are dependent on this treatment, and now it's running out, and now it is life or death, right? And there is no just getting along, right? Like there are this many doses in circulation, and when they're used up, right? And there is no real way around it as far as the characters in the story now. So I think that's really why this works, because they set up this situation where we are told like the stakes and the rules and how broader society thinks about the returned and the different arguments pro and con. Even if we don't agree with the anti-returned groups, we can still see where they're coming from. It's articulated in a way where we understand what their thought process is. That is actually the first reason for why I like this movie so much, is that I very frequently complain about lazy social commentary and all of that, right? One of the things, like in our Wicked review, we spent an hour talking about how the movie doesn't justify the prejudice in the story. And here I think it does so very effectively. Like, it doesn't do anything crazy, but we understand why people fear the returned, why they fear the zombies, in what ways the returned are being othered, right? Like there's the scene where Alex is giving a guitar lesson and one of the students makes a crack about the returned. Alex just throws him out. He never tells the students that he's a returned, but he just throws them out. And that like parallels how that kind of thing would play out in all sorts of situations, right? Where somebody thinks it's safe to express like a prejudice of some kind, and then somebody in the group is part of the group that's being attacked, right? So like you can fill in your example, right? I thought that played out in a really realistic way. We also see that it's a coping mechanism, right? That people are going after the returned because they can't really fight back. They're just regular people, right? They're not actually a danger. And people kind of feel the need to do something about it, right? There's also a really cool scene where Alex is, I think he's buying petrol in the gas station. As he takes out his wallet, he accidentally drops his returned card on the counter. Like the purpose of the card is, if he is ever in an accident, the EMTs realize that they need to handle his blood. Like they can't get into contact with his blood, right? Like that's the purpose of the returned card. And he accidentally drops it on the counter. And there's like this moment of where the gas station owner kind of has this awkward look, right? He's kind of pretending to not have seen it, but he has clearly seen it. And Alex kind of looks at him, trying to size him up, thinking, okay, what is he thinking? And is he going to kick me out? Is he going to deny me service? Is he going to discriminate, essentially, right? Nothing actually happens, but there's this moment of ambiguity where you don't know how this is going to go, because you don't know what's going through the other person's head, and it could go anywhere, right? Anywhere from it's fine to, pull out a gun. That's the range of possible outcomes to that situation, right? It's a very short scene, it's very understated, but I think that is how you do that, right? That it comes across as really realistic, because I think that plays out the way those kinds of situations play out.
Yeah, I agree. I think the movie handled those moments really well. And maybe in a different movie, they would have had someone say something, or they would have had someone kind of like react in a certain way. But I feel like the movie kind of always made the right choice in terms of how it portrayed people feeling something different and feeling something other, like you said in that example. Even in the ideas so there was that scene in the conference when Kate's sort of presenting about the newer virus that, or the synthetic protein virus that they would be able to administer to people, which then would give them more of an abundance of, the anti-zombie virus. And then you have the person who pretty much posts an idea that isn't too sort of far-fetched, isn't too cruel on those that are infected, by saying that why don't we have a separate society for them, just in case anything goes wrong, and like anyone who isn't infected wouldn't ever have sort of the risk of sort of accidentally running into someone or accidentally being turned into a zombie, because there wouldn't be anyone around. It kind of makes sense in the universe, but also you can also see the harms of it, of again like treating them as other and treating them as different, and sort of not allowing them to reintegrate into society. And you can kind of relate that to many things in real life. But it was just interesting to see the dynamic and sort of have someone be almost the voice that says what many others probably were also thinking, but he was kind of like the one that had the guts to kind of propose the difficult decision, essentially.
And there's a word for a place like that, right? It's called a ghetto or a concentration camp, right? That's what he's proposing. And and I think it says a lot about what the mood is in that society, because somebody is suggesting this seriously in public without being like, he's beating around the bush a little bit. But he's basically publicly advocating for camps, right?
It's out of desperation. Again, we kind of talk about the desperation in this movie, and this is out of desperation. This isn't as everything's functioning well in society and they have an abundance of the normal virus. This is at a point where they're running out of the normal virus. They don't know whether they're able to develop the new sort of antivirus. And it's going to be a very real situation soon of how many people do we have that are returned, and how soon are many of them who probably don't have the finances, probably don't have the resources to access more drugs than they already have. How soon does this become a problem to normal society, where you don't know if your neighbors are returned, and one day they might sort of attack you randomly, and then how that can spread, and how that can quite easily lead to another outbreak, another sort of widespread cases of infection. So it was just interesting to kind of like see it from, multiple perspectives.
And this is not a new idea. Like, this was being proposed about HIV positive people in the 70s. Did you know about that?
I didn't know about that.
So in the 70s, like, I think it was the 70s, the existence of HIV and AIDS became publicly, became known. And for a long time, there was no effective treatment and there was no cure. Like, there still isn't a cure, but there are effective treatments now, decades later. But back then, it was basically a death sentence. And it was invisible, and there was all sorts of stigma surrounding it, right? Lots of people were just not sure how the HIV virus was being transmitted, and what exactly you could do to protect yourself, and what was dangerous and what wasn't. And so there were a lot of conspiracy theories running around, but also a lot of very desperate and extreme solutions, and putting people in camps just to contain them, because if they're all in camps, then they can't infect anybody. That was being seriously thrown around. And then there were political and social and medical advances that meant that people with HIV were spared this fate. But this is what societies do when they are afraid and when they are desperate. The people who wrote this movie essentially studied the first couple of decades of the history of HIV and then just said, what if zombies? What if instead of a disease being communicated, it was the zombie virus? We are never quite told just how bad the zombie apocalypse was. We get some numbers about how many people died and so on, but it's something that their parents experienced, or that they experienced it's 30 years later now. So this is not a fresh memory, but people are so shell-shocked about this still, that the prospect of the treatment running out is enough to bring people to kind of the most extreme solutions. And that, I think that is a big part of why this movie works. It's because pretty much every statement that somebody makes is basically directly lifted from the history of HIV. There's the scene where Kate processes a new patient who is this 12-year-old boy who has been diagnosed as having contracted the zombie virus, and his parents have all these concerns about what do we do? Can he live a normal life? What do we need to know? And they're trying to be very supportive, but they are very scared, right? Because their life will be different from now on, right? Their child will have to take this daily injection. And if he misses only one, then disaster happens, right? But there's things scattered like this, info pamphlets about how the virus is being spread, about how you need blood contact to contract it and stuff like this. There's all these public health measures that are trying to manage the fear of the zombie. There's a lot of stuff in the background that kind of makes this believable, where people are acting as if they are in a real public health crisis. And I think that is really effective. And I think that is kind of what holds this movie together, is that even the bigots, even the people who are ready to lynch some people, like, it's horrible, but I understand where their head is at. And they are not cartoonish. They are, like, they do stupid stuff, right? And extreme stuff, right? Like, we have the scene where masked people are breaking into the returned ward and just execute all of them. This is something that people do, right? Like, this is like the kind of violence happens when people are afraid, or think they're afraid, or think they have reason to be afraid, or feel threatened, or whatever the case might be. So every step of this kind of felt kind of real.
No, definitely people taking stuff into their own hands. But this is what makes me not enjoy the ending of the movie as much. It's because after everything that's happened, after Alex has gone through every measure to try and get more access to the antivirus to try and live for a little bit longer, and after everything that's happened in society, they just find a cure on the same night after she's killed. It's on the same night, right?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that day, like, if they had just picked up their phone, they would have realized that a cure has, or the synthetic treatment is being distributed. So he died for no reason. Like, it's not like if he had lived another day, if he had lived another week, no, they just had to look at their phone, and then he would have lived.
It bugged me. But it bugged me because it just kind of undercut everything that had happened in the movie. And I felt like it could have been better if maybe it was like a year or two down the line, or if it was like sometime afterward, and maybe you had people who in that moment had time to sit and reflect on everything that they had done, especially his best friend Jacob, to kind of have to sit there a year removed and see that there was treatment, or maybe not even a year removed. Maybe if it was within the amount of days of treatments that they had, that they could have been split between the group of them, it would have been interesting to just sort of see that level of reflection. There was just like something that bugged me about everything kind of being solved on that one night after she's had to like make the sacrifice, and it turned out that everything was for nothing, pretty much.
Yeah, I'm of two minds about that. Like, on the one hand, this idea of powerlessness and arbitrariness and chance is something that is throughout the movie, right? You get the virus by chance and you die by chance, right? Like, it's like none of this is deserved or deliberate or has purpose, right? This is just a thing that happens. And that's kind of how health works, right? You don't deserve, or you don't, like, somebody can do something stupid and then get injured and then pay the price for the rest of their life or whatever. But for the most part, if you have health issues, it just happens. You could get diagnosed with like cancer today, and then the treatment doesn't work, and then 2 years later a new treatment comes out, and that would have worked, right? Like, it's like complete luck of the draw. There's no purpose to it, there's no justice to it, it just happens. So that's one aspect. And then there's the other aspect, which is it just feels so contrived. I think that's kind of what you were getting at. Like, if it had been a week or 2 days or whatever, right? Like, instead of like literally the same day, it would have felt more satisfying, maybe.
Yeah. Especially because Kate and the doctor that helped her get a few more shots had the conversation about this treatment that I think they had the conversation about the treatment that they were trying to develop, and how it wasn't quite there yet, and it wasn't where they needed it to be, and they needed a little bit more time, and this, that, and the other. So for then later that evening to miraculously it be working and ready to distribute to everyone, and fireworks going off and everyone celebrating again, because I don't feel like there would be a celebration or a widespread celebration, because there would be still that the return group who still had the same feelings, or still harbored sort of the same resentment to the return people, and still saw them as different and other in whatever way. So I think it's right in saying that if it was a week removed, if it was 2 weeks removed, if it was like enough time for it to logically make sense that everyone knew about it, it was being distributed, then yeah, it would have probably hit a little bit better.
Yeah, but that's not the only ending, right? And there's another ending where Kate has bought the house that they talked about buying. So first of all, didn't they just spend all their money on treatments? In the beginning of the movie, they talk about how that movie is outside their budget, and then they spend a whole bunch of money on dosages, right? I think they all come from that person who runs the dispensary, right? But point is, they keep talking about how expensive this is, and about how the price keeps going up every time, and then she just buys the house. It seems a little bit weird. And then we realize she's pregnant, And what does that mean? Is that like about life goes on? Maybe shouldn't this be some kind of big reveal? It's not like they've been talking about like the future or wanting to start a family, or I don't think that was a big topic earlier in the movie.
Because again, I talked about the emotional connection that I had to the story, but if you had that element of she's pregnant, maybe he doesn't know, but she knows that she's pregnant, and obviously us as the audience knows that she's pregnant, and this is why she's so desperate to keep him alive, and this is why she's so desperate to do whatever she can, spend whatever money she needs to go and kind of do whatever she can to try and get more doses to try and keep him alive for as long as possible. Maybe that would have added that level of stake or that level of connection to make me a little bit more drawn into the character.
The pieces just don't seem really connected, right? And then there's more. The camera then pans over to show like this stalker board where she's been tracking her former friends, and the implication being she's getting ready to kill them in revenge. So she's bought her dream house, she's pregnant, and she's planning a double murder. And that's end credits. What do you think about that?
It's not great, and I don't know whether they were trying to set it up for a sequel now that there was a world with an abundance of cure, but it's just like none of it really lines up really well.
Just have it end with Alex's death. That's it. That's all you need. And then like cut to a month later or a year later, and Kate reads the news about the synthetic treatment being released, and it makes her sad. End of movie. That's all you needed, right? Like all the other pieces seem to be really redundant and just muddy up the movie, because the core of this is how do you deal with kind of this knowledge that you have this condition, and that society would be better off if you just died. It's basically a daily struggle, right? You have to really remain on top of this for your entire life. And then, just something happens completely outside your control that completely upends everything. Like all of these things I really like. I think that's just how life is. And that is applicable to all sorts of conditions, topics, circumstances. It should just have been them coming to terms with this and realizing they're not going to have the life they were going to have. And it's nobody's fault, right? Like it just happens, and it's tragic, and they have to deal with it, and they have to come to terms with it. I think that's really the core. And I think that scene where he's chained up in his studio and they're saying goodbye, and they're kind of just hoping, and hope runs out, and he ends up shooting himself because that's the only way. That totally works, and I was really on board with that. And then they needed to add in all this other stuff. One other thing I wanted to bring up was that this movie is really polarizing. Like if you read opinions about this, some people say it's one of those hidden gems that if you're really into zombies, you've got to watch this. There's other people who say complete garbage, not a zombie movie. I don't get the appeal. And it comes down to, what's the difference between a zombie movie and a movie that has zombies in it?
That's a good question, because I always felt like it was always about the human conflicts, anyways, or in the zombie media that I've kind of consumed. It's normally about the human element of it and how society falls apart, and how things become a little bit more lawlessness, and how humans treat each other amidst a situation where society is completely falling apart. And this gives it the opposite of how do humans interact and how do humans treat each other, and how does society function post an apocalypse. So I've always been of the mindset, and it's not just zombie movies, it could be kaiju movies and stuff like that as well, is that I always appreciate the human core and the human elements of the story first and foremost, and then things like the zombies, etc., are just not decoration, but they're just additional pieces in there that fit the story that you're telling. Whereas I'm trying to think, would you class 28 Days Later or 28 Weeks Later as a movie with zombies in it, or a zombie movie with humans in it, or whatever you kind of describe it as?
So I would definitely call those zombie movies, even though the makers of those two movies don't really consider it that. Like they never call it zombie movies anywhere. But I think what this really comes down to is zombies are the things that kind of make the rules in a zombie story, right? They basically set a framework of these are the kinds of situations characters find themselves in, and these are the challenges and dangers and constraints and so on. And certain tropes come with that, right? So like you said, like collapse of civilization and people being the real monsters, and scarcity and breakdown of of all civilization and norms and law and order and all of that. And it becomes like most of the time it's like it's a survival story, right, where we either show how dysfunctional society was from the beginning, or how fragile it is, where it kind of falls apart at the slightest challenge. That is kind of the appeal of most zombie stories, and that is kind of what, like, if you just kind of try to categorize zombie movies, that is what most of them are like. Then a movie comes along that has zombies in it, but that doesn't follow the same rules, and then the question becomes, what's more important? Are the zombies the core of the movie, or are they kind of window dressing, right? Like if you have like a movie that has a completely different tone and style and philosophy behind it, but it still has zombies in it, is it still a zombie movie? And the school of thought that doesn't like this movie basically says, this is just a movie about any old disease. This doesn't have to be zombies, and you can cut out all the zombie stuff and it's still the same movie, and it doesn't do what I want zombie movies to do and what I like about zombie movies. I think this is kind of where we need to kind of separate kind of the tropes from kind of the aesthetics or the trappings. And my view is the zombies are kind of like a plot element as opposed to a genre in this. Like zombie movies exist, obviously, like Day of the Dead and The Walking Dead and all these other things that kind of follow in the standard template. That is kind of what a lot of people like about zombies. But my view is, as a storytelling device, you can also tell other kinds of stories with the same ingredients, right? So 28 Days Later, for example, is, in terms of structure, a very classical zombie movie, right? The zombie virus comes out of nowhere, society falls apart, people survive, they band together. The biggest challenges are not the zombies, but other people who are trying to take advantage of the chaos and of the lawlessness and all of that. But it's philosophically, it's the complete opposite of most zombie movies, right? Because it's not a total collapse, it's a temporary crisis. We can in fact move on, and we can in fact rebuild after this, and it's not hopeless, right? This is not the end. And I think this falls into a similar situation where I don't think the zombies are just window dressing. If you replace this with any other virus, it's not quite the same, because you do have things in here like people becoming a danger after they die. Right? Like, this is not the same. Like, if you have like a terminal disease and you need to be careful about not infecting other people, you don't inevitably turn into a danger to other people just by existing, right? Like you have to adjust your behavior, but somebody turning into a zombie and then attacking other people is kind of different, I think.
And would you say that there are still elements of the traditional sort of zombie tropes in this as well? Maybe not to the full extent, but again, the sense of lawlessness, where in this movie you have people that are breaking into multiple hospitals and shooting dead the infected people, and this is the threat of another zombie outbreak actually happening. So instead of sort of following societal norms, they're setting their own rules and they're sort of taking matters into their own hands. Even again, back to kind of the conference, where maybe a year or so beforehand, a suggestion like that would have never been uttered, but again, as things become a little bit more fragile, people become a little bit more emboldened in, saying their true feelings or saying the radical opinion in this. And it's still kind of showing how society is always on a bit of a knife's edge. And at any given point, if things progressively got worse, is how quickly, again, things would have fallen apart. So it's not the total collapse that you're used to seeing in normal zombie movies, but it's still showing that same sort of elements of lawlessness, of people being sort of ruthless, people being out for themselves, all just without a mass sort of total collapse. I don't quite understand the people that have the grievances toward this and wouldn't class it as a zombie movie. It's always a case where something deviates from the norm, where people sort of kind of throw their toys out the pram a little bit and get a little bit worked up over how they ideally want things to always be. But I always feel like there's always room to tell a different type of story, whether it's in the genre or whether it's in the type of movie that you're doing, or whether it's like in a universe or a franchise. There's always a different story that you can tell from the norm. And I feel like this one deviated from the normal practices of zombie movies, but didn't deviate for the sake of deviating. They actually had really sort of good themes. They had really good sort of ideas and concepts behind this, and what they wanted to do, I feel like they executed really well in the sense of sort of portraying a world post zombie apocalypse. So I don't know. I don't agree with the people that take issue with this movie and don't class it as a zombie movie.
So I can kind of see it from both sides. So if you like the standard story template of zombie movies, then this movie doesn't give it to you. Right? This is not the experience you want from a zombie movie, if that's your position. On the other hand, like you said, this is not simply doing it differently for the sake of doing it differently, right? This is not trolling, this is not subverting expectations. This is, they had an idea of what to do with the world in which zombies exist, and then they took it into a different direction, which I think is a totally fine thing to do. And you can always say you don't like it, right? Like if you're a big fan of zombie movies and this is just not your thing because it's too slow, because there are not enough zombies in it, whatever, I think that's a fine opinion to have. I do think people write it off because, like, at least in some of the comments I read just in discussions of this movie, some people are just dismissing it outright because there's not enough zombies in it. And I think you should at least try to understand what a movie is doing, and then you can always say, okay, I understand what this is doing, and I don't like it. That's a perfectly fine position to have. And I think what is different about this movie compared to other things that kind of subvert like genres and whatever, is that this respects the genre, I think. Because whenever we do see a zombie, whenever we do see a callback to the zombie apocalypse, and we get glimpses of what it was like, either when people encounter zombies or what it was like during the actual uprising, it is very much out of a zombie movie. Like those could be clips from a Dawn of the Dead movie or something, or from an episode of The Walking Dead, for example. So I can easily get kind of defensive about, hey, I think I like is being dragged through the mud by creatives who think they're better, right? Like that's one of my pet peeves, and I can easily get, maybe upset is a bit much, but I can easily be shut down when it comes to that, right? Because I just don't have a lot of patience for it. But this, I think, is making a good faith attempt to tell a different kind of story with the same premise. And for that reason, I think it's interesting as opposed to frustrating.
Has there been a sequel? And if not, why do you think we didn't get one?
To my knowledge, there has not been a sequel. This was a very low budget Spanish-Canadian production. This lost a whole bunch of money. Budget was 5 million estimated, and box office was 600,000. So this lost money. There was no reason to go anywhere. Also, the story is over, right? This is a story about a world in which zombies are managed, and we are running out of the drug that manages it. What do we do now? This movie tells this story, and it's done. And now the problem is solved, right? Like, what are you going to do in the sequel? Like, the synthetic drug runs out? At this point, the problem is solved, and we're back to kind of the normal world. And the scare of the zombie apocalypse is kind of something out of the history books at this point. And there's no real scenario in a way. Like, you could make a movie maybe set somewhere where people can't afford the drug. Like, maybe this drug is not evenly handed out to everybody. There could be a sequel potential, right? Or there's like a war, or kind of like breakdown of diplomatic ties, and then a country no longer wants to or can afford to or is allowed to import the treatment, right? The synthetic treatment. Like you could like if you really tried, you could come up with new stories. But I think this is like a one and done, and that's actually kind of what I like about it. It's that this is a very simple idea, and it does that, and I think it does it well for the most part. Like, the ending's not like should have been reconsidered, but everything else about the movie pretty much is what it needs to be, and there's not much potential here for more.
Okay. Well, I don't know. Was there anything else that we wanted to touch on?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I brought it up for one because we've been talking about a couple of zombie movies, and in 28 days and weeks later we had this conversation about like what else can you do with the zombie premise, and I think this movie is a good example of what you can do and how you can be different while still kind of keeping kind of the same basic premise and DNA. I'm also really interested in kind of this period of reconstruction, right? Like, here we didn't really have necessarily a reconstruction because like society didn't really fall apart, but like, how does society move on after the initial crisis, and how do they reorganize society, and how do they manage the existence of zombies? And one thing I really like about this movie is there are so many science fiction movies and horror movies and so on, mostly science fiction, where there is some kind of big scarcity or big resource or something where everybody needs a certain substance, and then the evil corporation abuses that and like controls out of society or whatever, right? And it's like, we already have things that we can't do without. Like, we can't do it without water, but the water companies are not running the world, right? And society knows how to manage, like, everybody needs sleep and food and water and medicine, and the bulk of human society is making sure that gets managed in some way, right? And different societies have different answers to this, but like, vast amounts of human effort are built towards meeting people's basic needs, in one way or another. There's just so many science fiction premises where people just don't seem to notice this, and say, what if we needed this drug to live? Or like a vampire story in which the vampires can't go out into the sun. Like all of society would be built around accommodating this, right? Like, there would be all of these different ways to meet this basic need. Like there was this movie Daybreakers, which was a world run by vampires, and then the blood runs out. And it's like, this is not a new idea, right? Like society already runs on things that everybody needs all the time. And we do everything in our power to protect and maintain the supply of this, right? So there's just so many science fiction stories where we kind of just ignore about how all of society works. And here it's kind of a mundane zombie story, right? It's the most boring thing, right? This is just how governments manage public health risks, right? Like go to any doctor's office and you'll see the pamphlets about how to manage diabetes or weight loss, or you know what I mean? Like anything, right? Like there are these efforts to get people to behave in a way that manages a problem. You know what I mean? And here that problem is the zombie virus.
I think I'm, very used to that type of storytelling where the evil corporation has what everyone needs and chooses to sort of exploit that. And during the movie, I was waiting. Anytime we had the sort of TV broadcast of the government or spokesperson from the government sort of speaking on the crisis, I was maybe not waiting for them to, be greedy and turn a profit, but to maybe be a little bit more radical and maybe side with the anti-return people, or sort of have some type of like radical idea on how to deal with them. Even when they were rounding them up to put them in, whatever camps that they were in, I was fully expecting that we'd maybe get a scene where they were just executing these people just because that's what we're sort of so used to seeing. But here they were just handling it like kind of normal government would, and a government that is concerned for sort of not all of its citizens, whether it's the returned or whether it's the healthy people in this. And it was weird, like genuinely, like I noticed it and it felt weird, and I was like, why are they acting normal? I don't know. It was a strange feeling, but that again kind of speaks to the realism of the movie, and again speaks to them really paying attention and not making this cartoony or making this over the top sort of animated, and just really broke down how would people react in a given situation. And I feel like for the most part they get it right each time.
We kind of had this with, like I've mentioned, COVID before in these kinds of conversations, and it's like we did not have food riots, we did not have martial law, we did not have like complete breakdown of social order. People kind of just stayed home, and many people suffered in silence, and like if you worked in a hospital during COVID, you had a really rough time. And if you got COVID, you got in a serious case, you had a really, really tough time. But society kind of trucked on. And now 5 years later, my life isn't different, and most people's life isn't different, unless you caught, long COVID or something. If you just walk around, you wouldn't know it happened. And that is kind of how this is. And I think that is kind of what I like about it, is that, like you said, it's just realistic. It's just like this is how it would be if this existed. There's not many movies that do this. Like the philosophy of this movie, I think, is pretty unique. And that is by itself remarkable. And I'm not saying all zombie movies should be like this, right? But I'm glad there's one. I could do with another two, maybe.
Yeah, you literally took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say, I enjoyed the premise enough I wanted to see maybe another sort of one or two of these made so far. And I don't know, again, this one completely tanked by what you're saying. So it doesn't seem like there's a clamor to make more of these when, traditional zombie movies and TV shows does what it does and brings in the numbers. But I would love for someone to have a look at this, think about how they can make it more appealing to the masses, and produce another movie similar to it, and maybe give us different characters in different situations with different predicaments, different things that they're worried about in this particular world, and just kind of see how they navigate that and see how they respond to the crisis or to sort of the impending issue of running out of vaccines, pretty much. So it's a shame that this movie did so bad. Because it doesn't feel like we're going to get anything like this, not for another sort of 20 to 25 years. And I don't know how popular it is online, whether it's like a cult classic to certain people, where maybe there's someone that comes along and discovers it and thinks that they can remake it in the next sort of 10 to 15 years. But I would love to see something else from this perspective of the zombie genre.
And I don't think this movie needs to be remade. Like the ending is kind of the big problem, but just by itself, the movie is what it should be. And I just wish a few more movies were made like this, like with this mentality. Like, it's not even like the specific plots or specific characters or specific tropes or whatever. It's more the mentality of it that I like. And that makes it pretty distinctive. Any other last thoughts on The Returned?
Last thoughts. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed my time with it. Again, without connecting to the characters, I just enjoyed the premise, the idea, and kind of not repeating myself because I think we kind of hammered home on those points. But I feel like it's a overall very enjoyable movie with really good ideas, and it's a good movie to study in a sense of how can you look at a particular genre that's done the same way over and over again, and how can you add a unique spin to it, and if you need an example of it, whether you apply to just the zombie genre or whether you apply to some other genres like the vampire genre or some of the kaijus, etc. This does it really well and has a lot of good ideas and really pays attention to the detail, which I appreciate a lot. It pays attention to the detail, pays attention to having real human responses to things as opposed to playing things up and acting things up. And I think those are the things I appreciate the most out of the movies.
All right, shall we wrap it up?
If you reached this part of the episode, thank you very much for working with us. Of course, if you liked everything that you heard in this podcast, you should probably tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought that we were chatting a bunch of nonsense about the zombie movie, probably tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast. See you later.
Bye-bye.